McDonald's is one of the most popular fast food franchises in the world, and there are currently about 40,000 McDonald's restaurants in the world. But in order to fully understand how many restaurants each country has, let's shrink that number down to only 100. If there were only 100, all of these places would have one McDonald's restaurant each. Russia, the Philippines, and Italy would have 2. The UK, Brazil, and Australia would have 3 restaurants. France, Germany, and Canada would each have 4. China, excluding Hong Kong and Taiwan, would be the country with the third most McDonald's locations, 7. Japan would have 8, which is a lot more per person than China, given that Japan has more than 10 times fewer people than China. However, the country with the most McDonald's locations would be the US with 37 McDonald's. It might not be very surprising that the US, the birthplace of McDonald's, also has the most McDonald's restaurants, but there is another American fast food franchise, KFC, that has a lot more locations in the country outside of America than in America itself. In fact, the US would only have 14 KFC restaurants if there were 100 in total. These countries would have 1 KFC, Canada would have 2, the following countries would have 3, Japan, India, South Africa, and the UK would have 4 each, the United States would have the second most locations with 14, like I said before, and the country with the most KFC restaurants would be China. China has about 10,000 KFC locations in real life, which would be 35 if there were only 100 in total. KFC was actually the first Western fast food chain to be introduced in China in the 1980s. There is another American franchise where the US only is 4th on the list of countries with the most locations. This franchise has a lot more locations in Asia than in North America. In fact, it has a lot more locations in Asia than in the rest of the world. I'm talking about 7-Eleven. What is most surprising to me among the countries shown on the screen is just how popular 7-Eleven seems to be in Taiwan. A small island with a relatively small population would have 8 stores if there were only 100. The US would be just above Taiwan with 13 locations. The 3 countries that have the most locations are South Korea, which would have 14 out of 100, Thailand, which would have 17, and Japan, which would have 30 out of 100 locations in total. 7-Eleven is currently owned by a Japanese company, which might play a part in why Japan has so many 7-Eleven locations. A fun fact is that although 7-Eleven is the franchise that has the most locations in the world, it's actually only found in a handful of countries. Subway is a franchise that is a lot less dominant in Asia. Here are all the countries that would have between 1 and 4 locations each. The UK would be in 3rd place with 6 locations, Canada would be in 2nd place with 8, and the US would be by far in 1st place with 56 out of 100 locations, more than half of all locations. The coffee company Starbucks is also quite US dominant, with 44 locations being located in the US. China also has quite a lot of locations with 17, and Canada has 7. Here is where the rest of the Starbucks locations would be. Another company that has the majority of its locations in the US is Apple. These countries would have 1 Apple store, Spain and Japan would have 2, Italy and Germany would have 3, Australia and France would have 4, Canada would have 6 stores, the UK 8, China 9, and the US would have 51 stores. However, the total number of Apple stores is only about 500, which is a lot lower than the other franchises in this video. The country with the most IKEA locations would only have 11 out of the 100 locations. Here are all the countries that would have 1 location. These 5 countries would have 2. Here are the countries that would have between 3 and 6 locations. Noticeably, Sweden, the birthplace of IKEA, would have 4 locations. China and France would have 8 locations each. The US would have the second most IKEA locations with 10. and Germany would have the most with 11. What surprised me most about Walmart was how many locations it has in Mexico. But first, here are the countries that would have between 1 and 6 stores. We can see that Walmart doesn't have a lot of stores in Europe. Mexico would have 22 stores, which is a lot more than I would have imagined. And the US would unsurprisingly be first with 47 stores.